4:31 a.m., March 14th, 2026. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. 14 federal agents moved through frost-covered grass on Stonebrook Drive, weapons drawn, body armor latched. 3 vehicles, 2 blacked-out FBI Suburbans and 1 NCIS tactical van, sat with engines running at the mouth of the street. No lights, no sirens. The house at the end of the block was dark. Total sanctions evasion value traced to the network behind this address, $340 million. The name on the badge that tied it together, Franco Demirci, defense contractor, logistics software consultant, TS/SCI clearance holder, assigned to Naval Supply Systems Command, Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, at 4:33 a.m. The lead agent raised his fist. The stack moved to the front door. Here's what nobody expected when this investigation started. The thread that unraveled a $340 million Iranian sanctions evasion network wasn't pulled by a counterintelligence officer or a Treasury analyst with a decade of Iran desk experience. It was pulled by a 29-year-old financial crimes analyst sitting in a basement office at FBI Washington Field Division, running pattern recognition software on flagged cryptocurrency wallet clusters at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in January 2026. Her name was Reyes. She had been with the Bureau for 4 years. She almost closed the file. She didn't. What she found instead would put a cleared Department of Defense contractor in federal custody, freeze 34 shell entities across 9 jurisdictions, and produce what prosecutors would later describe as the most consequential simultaneous application of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and the Espionage Act in a single indictment since the statute's modern expansion. None of that was visible at 11 p.m. in January. What was visible was a number that didn't fit. The software flagged 17 USDT wallets cycling transactions through a Seychelles-registered entity called Marlin Gate Holdings. The wallets had moved a combined $12, $4 million in the previous 90 days. That alone wasn't unusual. Crypto flows through offshore shells constantly. What was unusual was the velocity pattern. The wallets weren't holding. They were sweeping, moving funds in and out within 18-hour windows, cycling through 3 intermediary wallets before landing in a final address registered to a UAE-based financial services firm called Al Hazen Commercial Advisors. The cycle repeated with mechanical precision. Reyes ran the pattern against OFAC's designated entity database. Al Hazen Commercial Advisors appeared in a 2023 Treasury advisory as a known facilitator of Iranian sanctions evasion. She flagged it. At that point, it was a crypto alert, a referral. Standard procedure, the kind that gets routed to a financial crimes task force, logged, and worked on a timeline measured in weeks. What accelerated everything, what turned a financial alert into a national security emergency, was a single correlation that surfaced 22 hours later when the referral landed on a joint FBI-NCIS desk. One of the 17 wallets had received its initial funding transfer from an account registered to a Delaware LLC called Cascade Meridian Solutions. Cascade Meridian Solutions had a tax identification number. That number was cross-referenced against contractor payment records in the Defense, Finance, and Accounting Service database. The match returned one name, Franco Demirci. The investigators who first saw that correlation described the moment in deposition as controlled disbelief. DoD contractors appear in financial crime investigations. It happens. Most of the time, the explanation is mundane. A contractor did some work for a company that later turned out to have problematic affiliations. Coincidence. Distance. No mens rea. This did not look like coincidence. Demirci's clearance level was TS/SCI, top secret with sensitive compartmented information access. His assignment at Naval Supply Systems Command in Mechanicsburg placed him inside the logistics management architecture for U.S. Navy commercial tanker coordination. His work involved updating and maintaining the software systems that tracked scheduling windows for contracted fuel and supply tankers moving through designated corridors in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Gulf of Oman. He had red-level access to tanker movement schedules. He had right-level access to the scheduling interface for coordination windows. The context of what that access meant in January 2026 is hard to overstate. Since October 2025, the United States Navy had been enforcing a graduated maritime blockade of Iranian commercial ports, tightening fuel import capacity as part of a sanctions pressure campaign coordinated with Treasury, OFAC, and the State Department. The blockade was not a physical wall. It was a presence and intercept posture. U.S. destroyers repositioning along known commercial shipping lanes, creating enforcement windows that closed and reopened based on operational tempo. The timing of those windows was not public. It was not published. It was managed through internal Navy logistics software. The software Franco Demirci maintained. The question that immediately followed the DFAS correlation was one that investigators at the Joint Desk spent the next 6 hours trying not to answer too quickly. How much could he have seen? What access windows did he actually use? And had anything he touched correlated with gaps in the blockade? The answer to that last question came from a NAVSUP logistics audit pulled at 7 a.m., the following morning by an NCIS counterintelligence officer in Washington. The audit showed 41 access events on the scheduling coordination module over a 9-month window, October 2025 through January 2026. 27 of those events corresponded to the hours immediately before what the audit flagged as anomalous tanker corridor adjustments. Corridor adjustments that, when cross-referenced against destroyer repositioning logs provided by naval intelligence, corresponded to windows where U.S. enforcement coverage in the Strait of Hormuz approaches thinned. The correlation was not proof. Not yet. But it was enough to open a full investigation. The case was designated Priority Financial Espionage under joint FBI-NCIS authority. A dedicated team of 11 analysts and case agents was assembled within 48 hours. Treasury OFAC was briefed at the Deputy Assistant Secretary level. The lead case agent, a veteran FBI special agent named Carver, who had spent 9 years on the Iran desk at the Bureau's Counterproliferation Division, flew to Washington from his field office in Baltimore on a Wednesday morning in late January and didn't go home for 11 days. I spent hours going through the case file, and one detail kept nagging me. Demirci had passed his most recent counterintelligence polygraph 14 months earlier. Clean. No anomalies flagged. The polygraph examiner's notes described him as calm, cooperative, and showing no indicators of deception on the access and disclosure questions. Clean bill of clearance. The network he was allegedly feeding had been operational, according to financial records, for at least 18 months before that polygraph. The first obstacle the investigation team hit wasn't evidentiary. It was jurisdictional. The Marlin Gate Holdings entity in the Seychelles sat outside standard U.S. subpoena reach. Getting financial records from the Seychelles required a mutual legal assistance treaty request routed through the State Department. MLAT requests on financial institutions take an average of 4 to 6 months. The investigation could not wait that long. The team needed account-level transaction data before Demirci noticed anything and moved assets. Agent Carver escalated directly to the National Security Division at DOJ. The escalation cleared in 72 hours. A parallel track was opened using OFAC's blocking authority. Treasury designated Marlin Gate Holdings as a specially designated national under the Iranian sanctions regime, triggering an immediate asset freeze and compelling financial institution disclosure under U.S. correspondent banking rules. The Seychelles entity processed its transactions through a correspondent account at a New York clearing bank. That account was frozen within 5 days of the designation. The transaction records followed. What the records showed made the scope of the investigation expand immediately. Marlin Gate Holdings was not the top of the chain. It was a middle layer. The entity received funds from 7 additional shell corporations spread across Oman, Cyprus, and the UAE, all of which showed inbound wire transfers from a cluster of front companies with Iranian-linked beneficial ownership previously identified in a 2024 OFAC sanctions package targeting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' external financing network. Demirci was not dealing with a single handler. He was connected, through multiple intermediary layers, to an IRGC-affiliated financial logistics operation that had been running for years. The scale of what had moved through the network, across all 34 entities that investigators would eventually identify, came to $340 million. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. For a network moving $340 million, the amount Demirci himself received was relatively modest. Wire transfers routed to Cascade Meridian Solutions, his Delaware LLC, over the 18-month operational window totaled $2. $8 million. That's not nothing, but it's a fraction of the total network value. Which raised an obvious question for investigators. Was Demirci aware of the scale of what he was feeding? Did he know he was part of a $340 million Iranian sanctions evasion infrastructure? Or did he think he was doing something smaller and more contained? Selling scheduling data to commercial intermediaries he could plausibly tell himself were just looking for market advantages. The answer, when it came, was not ambiguous. Investigators established covert monitoring of Demirci's digital activity under FISA authority in the second week of February 2026. The monitoring covered his personal devices, his network activity at home, and, through coordination with NCIS, his access behavior on the NAVSUP systems at the Mechanicsburg facility. He was not approached. He was not alerted. The investigation around him remained entirely non-contact for 6 weeks. What the monitoring captured over those 6 weeks answered the question about awareness. Demirci used a Signal account on a secondary device. A burner phone registered to a Philips Electronics retail account opened with a prepaid Visa card to communicate with a contact saved in the device under the name Arash. The Signal conversation history on that device, later recovered forensically, ran to 14 months. The content of those conversations was not ambiguous about what Demirci understood himself to be doing. He referred to the data he was passing as window data. He used specific terms that matched the internal scheduling nomenclature at NAVSUP. He discussed, in multiple exchanges, the relationship between the scheduling windows and destroyer positioning. He asked, in one exchange dated November 2025, whether the movements last week had been useful. The response from Arash, translated from Farsi by FBI interpreters, confirmed that the data had allowed 3 transits to complete without interception, 3 tanker transits, through blockade gaps, correlated directly to scheduling windows Demirci had accessed. The monitoring also captured a voice call made on February 28, 2026, the only voice call in the dataset. Demirci called the burner number from a payphone at a gas station in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, 20 miles from his home. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Demirci asked about a payment he said was overdue. The person on the other end told him the delay was related to complications with the channel, Demirci said, and this is a direct quote from the FBI translation of the intercept, that he was not going to keep taking the risk without the money moving on time. He knew the risk. He was taking it deliberately. There's a line in the indictment that reads almost like fiction. Demirci is described as having queried the NAVSUP scheduling database 41 times in 9 months, with 27 of those queries occurring between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Outside his normal assigned work hours, using his valid access credentials but from a remote VPN node that the NCIS audit later identified as inconsistent with his known home network. He had been accessing the system from a secondary location. Investigators believe that location was a rented room at a business hotel in Harrisburg, paid for in cash, visited on average twice per month. The room was never identified with certainty. It's one of the details that doesn't close. What's most surprising about this case isn't the money. It's the duration. 18 months of active data exfiltration through an active TS/SCI credential, through a classified logistics system during an active naval enforcement operation. And it was a financial crimes analyst's pattern recognition flag on a crypto wallet cluster that surfaced it, not a routine CI review, not a tip. An algorithm looking for anomalous cycling behavior in USDT transactions found a thread that led to a cleared defense contractor feeding naval blockade schedules to an IRGC-affiliated network. If the cycling pattern had been slightly more varied, if the 18-hour sweep windows had been randomized rather than mechanically consistent, the flag might never have fired. Here's the take that'll probably get pushback. The clearance renewal and polygraph system failed here in a way that deserves more scrutiny than it will get. Demirci was polygraphed 14 months into his active exfiltration of classified material. He passed. The polygraph is not a reliable detection instrument for people who have normalized their behavior, who have successfully compartmentalized their deception over long enough periods that it no longer registers as acute stress. The CI community knows this. It has known it for decades. The reliance on polygraph as a primary counterintelligence safeguard for TS/SCI holders is a structural vulnerability, and this case is a documented example of that vulnerability being exploited in real time during a live national security operation. That won't be the headline, but it should be part of the conversation. By the first week of March 2026, the investigation had produced enough to move. The joint FBI, NCIS, OFAC task force had documented 27 correlated access events, 14 months of encrypted signal communications, financial flows totaling $2, $8 million to Demirci's LLC, and $340 million in aggregate network value frozen across 34 entities in 9 jurisdictions. The coordination for simultaneous action across those 9 jurisdictions, Seychelles, UAE, Cyprus, Oman, Malta, Singapore, Hong Kong, the British Virgin Islands, and the United States. Required 72 hours of diplomatic and legal coordination between DOJ's National Security Division, OFAC, and partner liaison offices through Interpol financial crime channels. The arrest warrant for Demirci was signed by a federal magistrate in the Middle District of Pennsylvania on March 12, 2026. 2 charges: violation of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 794. The Espionage Act provision covering the transmission of national defense information to a foreign government or its agents. Prosecutors noted in the warrant application that the Iran naval blockade operation constituted an active national security emergency under the President's IEEPA declaration, making the espionage conduct an aggravating factor under the sentencing guidelines. What do you think? Did the clearance system fail here? Or was this a case where no system could have caught it faster? Comment below. The arrest operation itself involved coordination between FBI's Pittsburgh Field Division, NCIS's Atlantic Field Office, and a tactical support element from FBI's hostage rescue team on a no-knock warrant authorization, given the presence of encrypted devices and the risk of remote wipe. The tactical plan called for simultaneous action at 4:30 a.m., targeting the Harrisburg residence, and coordinated law enforcement notifications in 3 foreign jurisdictions to prevent asset flight. The obstacle that almost delayed execution by 24 hours, the Pfizer monitoring team picked up at 9:47 p.m. on March 13th, the night before the planned arrest. A brief encrypted transmission from Demirci's burner phone. The transmission was outbound. The destination was the Arash contact number. The message content was not recoverable in real time. The team didn't know whether it was routine or whether Demirci had been tipped. Agent Carver made the call to hold the timeline rather than accelerate. If Demirci had been warned, moving early might push him to run. Holding gave the tactical team the advantage of a sleeping target. Carver spent the next 6 hours waiting for any sign of unusual activity at the residence. There was none. The operation held. At 4:31 a.m. on March 14th, 2026, the stack moved. The front door breach took 11 seconds. Demirci was in the master bedroom, 2nd floor. He was detained at 4:33 a.m. Without resistance, still in bed. He said nothing to the agents who cuffed him. He looked, according to the arresting agent's account, less surprised than the account might suggest. Not calm. Not cooperative. Just. Not surprised. The search of the residence took 4 hours and 20 minutes. Forensic recovery teams worked through 2 encrypted laptops found in a home office on the main floor, a Dell commercial unit and a Lenovo ThinkPad, both with full disk encryption. The encryption was expected. The warrant had anticipated it. NCIS forensic specialists imaged both drives on-site for later laboratory decryption. The ThinkPad's encryption was defeated within 72 hours using a vulnerability in the firmware version. The Dell took 11 days. What both devices contained, once accessed, confirmed, and extended everything the monitoring phase had captured. In a closet in the home office, behind a false panel in the lower shelf. A modification to the existing cabinetry that would not have been visible without removal of the shelving unit. Agents found $1, $2 million in gold. Specifically, 47 1-ounce American Gold Eagle coins, 63 1-ounce South African Krugerrands, and 11 100-gram Pamp Suisse gold bars, totaling approximately $2 million at March 2026 spot price. The gold was bagged and inventoried in place. Put yourself in the forensic accountant's position for a second. You're looking at a guy who made $2. $8 million in wire transfers to a Delaware LLC. Traceable, documented, flagged by Treasury. And he's also holding $1. $2 million in physical gold in a hidden cabinet in his home office. The cash wasn't in the bank. It wasn't in the LLC. It was in a form that doesn't touch the financial system. The question that immediately follows is, how much moved through that form over 18 months that no financial record will ever capture? The answer is unknown. That number doesn't exist in any filing. The burner phone, the secondary signal device, was recovered from a zippered interior pocket of a winter coat hanging in the front hall closet. The phone was powered off. Forensic extraction of the device, completed by the FBI's Digital Forensics Lab in Quantico, produced 847 recovered messages spanning 14 months of communication with the Arash contact. The messages were in English and Farsi, often switching mid-conversation. They covered scheduling windows, payment timelines, corridor references, and, in the final 3 weeks before the arrest, an escalating discussion about what Demirci described as needing to stop for a while. He had been considering going dark. He hadn't moved fast enough. Will networks like this one emerge again from inside the cleared contractor community? Comment why yes or no. The question matters more than it sounds. Demirci was transported to the federal courthouse in Harrisburg at 8:15 a.m. He was arraigned the same day. He entered no plea at arraignment. Bond was denied on the government's motion, citing flight risk and access to concealed assets. His attorney, a Philadelphia-based federal defense lawyer retained within hours of the arrest, issued a brief statement indicating his client looked forward to his day in court. The simultaneous action in the 9 foreign jurisdictions produced mixed results, which is the honest accounting. In the UAE, Al Hazen Commercial Advisors' accounts were frozen through OFAC coordination with the UAE Central Bank's Sanctions Compliance Unit. The company's listed director, a Bahraini national identified in court filings only as Individual A, was not present at the Dubai registered office when UAE authorities conducted their compliance action. He has not been located. His last confirmed location, according to Interpol liaison reporting cited in the FBI's case summary, was a flight from Dubai to Muscat on March 13th, the night before the arrest. The transmission Demirci's burner phone sent at 9:47 p.m. on March 13th has not been decoded. Whether there is a connection between that transmission and Individual A's departure from Dubai remains an open question in the case file. The Arash contact was never identified beyond the name in the signal conversation. The phone number associated with the account routed through a Turkish carrier and resolved to an account opened with a false identity document. Interpol is listed as the lead agency for the international identification effort. As of the time of this account, no identification has been made public. In Cyprus, Malta, and Singapore, the shell entities were dissolved or frozen by local regulatory action coordinated through OFAC's Foreign Financial Intelligence Unit. In Hong Kong, 2 of the entities had already been deregistered before action could be taken. The deregistration filings were dated March 10th and 11th, 2026, 3 days before the arrest. Someone in the network knew something was moving. The sequence of those deregistrations, in the days immediately before the arrest operation, is one of the open threads in the case that prosecutors have not publicly explained. One detail that stuck with me: the network's total traced value is $340 million. Of that, $47 million in identifiable proceeds has been restrained or frozen across the active entity accounts. The remaining $293 million, the bulk of the network's operational value, moved through the system during its active period and is not recoverable through current asset freezes. It's gone into layers of the global financial system that enforcement action arrived too late to catch. The $47 million seized is real. The $293 million is a number in a court filing. That gap matters. The case against Franco Demirci moved to the grand jury in April 2026. A superseding indictment, returned by the grand jury on May 8, 2026, added 3 counts of money laundering under 18 U.S.C. Section 1956 and 1 count of making false statements to investigators, a reference to a post-arrest proffer session in which Demirci made representations about his financial activity that the government subsequently found inconsistent with recovered records. His attorney withdrew following the superseding indictment. New counsel entered an appearance in May. Trial has not been scheduled as of the date of this account. The government's case involves classified evidence being handled under SIPA, the Classified Information Procedures Act, which governs how national security material is managed in criminal proceedings. The SIPA process typically adds months to the pretrial timeline. Defense counsel has indicated intent to contest the admissibility of FISA-derived evidence, an argument that federal courts have consistently rejected in national security prosecutions under the current statutory framework, but one that is standard practice in cases of this type. The prosecutors in the case have publicly described the IEEPA Espionage Act combination as the first dual-charge application in the context of the Iran naval blockade enforcement action. The combination carries substantial sentencing exposure. The IEEPA violation alone, for willful conduct during a declared national security emergency, carries a maximum of 20 years. The Espionage Act count carries a potential life sentence. There's something about the sentencing exposure in this case that doesn't sit right, even now. Not because it's too harsh, but because the duration of the alleged conduct, the active national security context, and the documented operational impact on the blockade enforcement arguably justify every bit of it. And yet the structural failures that allowed 18 months of undetected exfiltration through A live classified system will receive no comparable accountability from any institution. The contractor is charged. The system that polygraphed him 14 months in and found nothing is unchanged. The network that Demirci allegedly fed is, on paper, dismantled. 34 entities frozen or dissolved. $47 million restrained. One contractor in federal custody awaiting trial. The handler in Dubai is still unlocated. The Arash contact is still unidentified. The 2 Hong Kong entities deregistered 3 days before the arrest. Someone made those filings. That person has not been named in any public proceeding. And the $293 million that moved through the network during its 18-month operational window, through tanker corridors, through blockade gaps, through scheduling windows pulled from a classified Navy logistics system by a man with a TS/SCI clearance and a burner phone. That money does not appear in any seizure order. It's not coming back. The 3 tanker transits that completed without interception in November 2025 confirmed by Arash in a signal message as having been useful. Those transits happened. Whatever moved on those tankers, it moved. That's not a file that gets closed. Subscribe if you want to follow where the Demirci case goes from here. The trial, when it's scheduled, is going to produce classified evidence proceedings that don't get covered the way they should. The network is dismantled. The demand that created it still exists. And somewhere between Dubai and Muscat, on the night of March 13th, 2026, a man boarded a flight and didn't come back. The file on him is still open.